You had me at Cello, Cello. You had me at Cello. You had me at Cello. Oh, you had me at Cello. Good afternoon, everybody. It's 5 o'clock on a Friday again. Time for another episode of Cello Chat. And with me this week is Julia Floberg. How are you doing today, Julia?
I'm doing well. Looking forward to Christmas, obviously.
Right, excellent. A beautiful tree. So, would you tell our viewers your musical biography? How did you get to where you are, and what drew you to cello in the first place?
So I started playing when I was 5 at McPhail, which is a place in Minneapolis. And I started on cello because my mom loves cello. And she was like, I've always wanted a cellist in the family. I have 4 older siblings who all play instruments. And I stuck with it through high school. I did youth orchestras and kept taking lessons. And then I ended up going to Dartmouth College in New Hampshire, small liberal arts college. Not sure what I would focus on. And I ended up spending a lot of time in the music department, playing a lot of chamber music, playing in the orchestra. So I decided maybe I would want to pursue it as a career path. So I started doing all the summer festivals. I went to Eastern Music Festival and Killington, which is in Vermont, and Aspen. Have to forgive me. Sometimes I have a baby who might interject with his comments. And I was considering applying for master's programs, but then I ended up taking a little break for a while just because I kind of burnt out. So I stopped playing for about 2 years. And that's when I started playing guitar and I started playing ukulele. It was the first one, ukulele. I played a lot of Beatles songs on ukulele for a while. And then I did a program with a cellist named Eugene Friesen. He did this improvisation program. And that got me really excited about different possibilities on the cello. So after I took that program with him, I started experimenting with writing songs on the cello and playing different genres. And I ended up in Boston for a while. And I took some lessons with him. I took some lessons at Boston University. And I ended up deciding that I could be a cellist who wasn't just a strictly classical cellist. So when I moved back to Minnesota in 2016, I spent about 6 months just going to every event I could, like the open jazz jam session or the open mic at the Japanese sushi restaurant or the improvisational orchestra where it was like a group of musicians who were led by a conductor and it was mostly improv. And from there, that's when I started joining other groups. I formed the Delphia Cello Quartet, which is a group of women who play some classical songs, but also contemporary songs. And I do all the arranging for that group. I joined a folk group called Lady Spruce that is 2 violins and cello. They're also both classically trained, but we sing harmonies and we play the backups on those instruments. And I was in a group called Mistifonia for a while, which was music from South America and the Iberian Peninsula, Spain and France and Portugal. So a lot of discovery, still do a lot of freelancing, still play with some regional orchestras, do a lot of stuff where playing tribute bands, like with Elton John songs and stuff like that. Right now, I'm playing in the Bridgerton Experience, which is a Netflix experience that has live musicians, and we dress like we look like Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart. So that's really fun. Yeah, so it's a journey, but I've found that music is music, and playing other genres has actually given me a deeper appreciation for classical music.
Outstanding. Now, I think there are probably quite a few cellists in the country who would like to go that route, but it does not necessarily come easy to first of all, to take the initiative to say, all right, I can be a musician, a cellist, and not have to necessarily follow one of the more traditional, like a strictly classical route. And then, I mean, you know, just how did that kind of come about? How did you come to realize that that could be a feasible route for you? Were you just the success of a certain number of early songs, or getting some arrangements published, or can you go into more detail about that path?
I mean, building a career as a freelancer is tough at the beginning because networking is so important. So it's hard to get hired before anyone knows who you are. And as far as songwriting goes, I have released 2 albums and a single. That is a whole nother beast. So maybe I'll talk about freelancing first, since that's largely how I make my income right now. Um, and at first, I had to work a lot of odd jobs to make it work. You know, I did some like landscaping work for a while on the side. I worked as a cashier at like a fish restaurant. And this was all like in my late 20s, you know, still trying to piece it together, you know, trying to figure out what the lessons and the networking and because I did a lot of work for free at the beginning, which is not great, but I just really wanted to play and I really wanted to get to know everybody. But once I started making more connections with people in different areas of music, classical music included, but also in other genres, then they started to realize, oh, Julia is a good cellist, she's good to work with. And then I started getting more work, and then I started getting more work, and you know, and from there it grows. And you know, by the time I was 29, I was only making my income off of music, and that felt like a huge success. But I think it's just that early time that's very uncertain of trying to piece it together is challenging. Now, as far as the singer-songwriter side goes, that is a whole nother business model that I have not mastered. It's very difficult to build an audience, and it's very difficult to sell music in this current day and age of streaming. So it costs a lot of money to record an album. And if you want other musicians on the album, you want to pay them as well. So even after making money from doing some live shows, you might just break even and hope you make a few dollars on the royalties you make through your streaming services, which may be, you know, like $20 a month. So that's much more difficult. There are a lot of singer-songwriters who have more success through like Patreon, which is where your subscribers and followers can directly support you for what you do, and you provide them with special content. Or there are some artists who get very good at touring or at the YouTube. You can generate a lot of money through advertising if you get a big subscription base. But that is a big amount of effort that I put towards the freelancing side and not towards the singer-songwriter side.
Okay, so now, as far as singer-songwriters go, I think there are quite a few. In general, I think it's more common for them, for example, to sing and maybe compose or arrange at the piano or at the guitar. And somehow is not generally a big deal, it seems, for guitar players to also sing at the same time. But cellists, a lot of cellists, are not necessarily comfortable singing and playing cello at the same time. To you, is that just part and parcel, you know, no real difference, or did you have to do anything above and beyond to try and get the coordination to sing and play cello at the same time?
It is more challenging. I mean, I also play guitar, and it is way easier to play guitar and sing than it is to play cello and sing, mostly because guitar is a fretted instrument, so you cannot control the intonation. It is what it is. But on a cello, you're trying to control the intonation of your cello and your voice at the same time. And also something about the coordination with the bow is difficult. The way I got into it was just kind of thinking of the cello more like a guitar. So I did a lot of, you know, pizzicato with chords. So I'd find a chord and I would put them together. And from there, that established a base of, oh, this is possible. And then starting to add the bow in, and then starting to think, oh, it doesn't just have to be chords all the time. I can harmonize with myself, right? Or I can create really cool patterns. One nice thing about taking some lessons with Eugene Friesen was he showed me some cool technique for cello that I was then able to apply to thinking of composing and songwriting.
Well, now, and then how did the founding of the Delphia Quartet come about? Is there more, like, how did you meet the other three people, and how did you four kind of come up with a plan in terms of performances and rehearsals that was agreeable?
I don't know if Delphia would have ever happened if if I didn't meet Rochelle Lene Smith, who's another cellist, singer-songwriter, who now lives in Washington, unfortunately. But we met at Motowai, which was that open mic at the Japanese restaurant.
Huh.
And we were both the cellists who would do our own songs, but we would also play with a lot of the other singer-songwriters, because of course they're like, oh, there's a cello here. Do you want to just play on my song? So we got to know each other pretty well. And I told Rochelle, I really miss cello ensemble. You know how most cello programs, you play in a cello ensemble, like I did in high school, I did in college. It's like, why doesn't this happen anymore? And Rochelle said, me too. And I said, let's start a group. So I knew another cellist, Amanda Bergdorf, who will be there in April. And I met her through the improvisational orchestra. And she was also a cellist who was a trained vocalist. It's like, okay, we have something happening here. So we formed this quartet, and it started by, I was just scrambling to figure out how to arrange music. The first piece I arranged was Sia's Chandelier, which we have on YouTube. And it was like, well, at that point I had done it by myself with a loop pedal. So I had a loop pedal, and it's like, okay, so you put down the bass line, and then you can put the melody over it, and then maybe you can harmonize with the melody. So from there, I was able to just figure it out on my own cello and then put it into finale. And I'm not the hugest fan of my early arrangements, just because they were very, whatever the recording was doing, I put into the arrangement. But it was a good start. And that's really how the Cello Quartet got going, is we put out a couple of YouTube videos and we did a couple of shows, and we got like a really good reception. People were really excited about it. Sorry, we've got to talk her over.
Well, now, okay. Fortunately, there is quite a bit of really fun stuff to play for cello quartet. I mean, not only some original compositions for cello quartet, but a lot of arrangements, some of which are so good that you either kind of don't know or don't care that they weren't originally written for cello quartet. But there are also some, I don't know, sometimes with certain arrangements or compositions even, you can kind of tell just how well people understood the idioms of writing for the cello, and the kind of the dangers, muddiness of having everybody too low, or things like that. Do you have any, what's your general philosophy of arranging for cello quartet, or do you have one?
A general philosophy for arranging?
Yeah, for cellos, for four cellos.
It's hard to say that if I have a philosophy. There are general things that I've learned, which is like just being aware of register. Mm-hmm. What's really great about the cello is that it covers a low range and a high range, which isn't always true of string instruments. So it means that there's more terrain to work with to give it more shape. But certain registers of the cello, I really want to put the melody there. But if you have other cellos playing, it is not going to carry. So just being aware of that, like that range on the first position on the A and D string is really nice, but it will not carry over three other cellos unless you're very careful about what the other three cellos are doing. as opposed to, like going up into fourth position, thumb position on the A string. That is going to carry really well. Other things I've learned about arranging for cellos is I'm a big fan of using other techniques like the chop, the percussive chop, because then you can get some drums going, right? Or, just more textural, using pizzicato, using flautando or ponticello, throwing stuff in there that gives it not only harmony, but a textural depth to it. And I find that to be much more interesting, especially when we're arranging pop songs that are usually very repetitive.
Yep. Yeah.
A lot of people know of the Vitamin String Quartet, and they do have a lot of fun pop songs for string quartet, but they will repeat the same thing over and over and over again, like someone went into Finale and copy and pasted whatever they were doing in the previous chorus. It's like, that's a really good opportunity to do something new.
Yeah, it's true. That's true. A good arrangement often finds, you don't want to constantly be reinventing the texture, but there are just certain opportunities in a piece where if you keep it exactly the same, it gets a little bit not as interesting as to take those opportunities to do something different.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
All right. So you mentioned having been burned out for a while. And that again, it's hard to know just how many people, not just cellists, either have a time like that or maybe from time to time get to feeling like they're whether it's just lacking in motivation for that particular path, or just maybe that they feel like they're spinning their wheels or what. But what thoughts do you have about getting motivated to practice more, to find a path that does inspire you and light your fire? What are your thoughts about motivation to play and practice?
I've found that what will motivate me to practice is finding something that I'm excited to play. And I find that with my students too. It's much harder when you're just starting out, when you can't really play anything. So that's always hard with the beginners, is they're really excited about something. And it's, well, we can't play that yet. You just have to keep the motivation going until we can get there. But once you reach a certain level, there are things you feel like you have to practice. And yes, you do have to practice those things, but also finding the things that make you excited to take the cello out. Where it's not even a question of, am I going to play today? But I want to play today. And sometimes starting out with that, because starting something is often the hardest thing. Yeah. It could even be like doing the dishes. It's just start doing the dishes and then you'll finish doing the dishes. So even just starting to play with something you're excited about, then once you're playing, it's like, okay, now I've started playing, the cello's already out. Now I can practice the things that really need to be practiced.
Now, so we have an improvisers orchestra at Whitewater as well. Brad Townsend leads it. And I'm just wondering if your experience with improvisers orchestra is kind of the same thing, where sometimes it's just that getting started into an idea. And once something gets going, it can kind of have a life of its own, or a momentum. There's a musical flywheel that goes on, but just getting started can often be the biggest challenge there too.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, that is true. If you want to make your own music, it's often people won't even try because it's like, well, the first thing I do might be terrible. And yes, it might be bad, but that's okay. Just start doing it. And then the more you do it, the better you're going to get at it. Just like the cello. It's not like I picked up cello and was a great cellist. It actually took me a lot of work. There are a lot of people when I was a teenager who were much better than me. But it's kind of a stick to it-ness that really carries through.
Yeah. And then another question, another follow-up. the fact that you did ukulele and guitar, and also talked about some of the guitar to the cello playing. I just, for the sake of, for example, my own students watching this, whether you have some thoughts about the value of not just kind of knowing your arpeggios, but really being able to think chordally on whatever instrument you're playing, whether it's cello or guitar or piano. That helps.
Oh, I wish that everyone had to learn chord-based theory because it is so useful. And really, I only started thinking of it when I started playing guitar, but being able to read number charts or chord charts, first of all, will get you more work. Absolutely. And second of all, it just, your knowledge of how music works just expands. Because as someone who plays a melody-based instrument for a long time, even in college when I was taking theory courses, I just wasn't clicking. But as soon as I started to think chordally, then all of a sudden, all these things started to click. And also just being able to hear those changes and then understanding how composition worked better and then also appreciating it more. Like the beauty of like the major seven. It's like, oh yes.
Oh, it's funny that you mentioned that. There was just a discussion with my cello ensemble that I'm looking forward to them being able to meet you all on April 22nd. Was, you know, the tuning of a dissonance, like a major seventh or a minor second. There can be a lot of times when a cellist's instincts will be to kind of bend it towards where it's going to resolve. But in something like a 4/7 chord or a 1/7 chord in a major key, it doesn't resolve. It just sits there as this lovely, bright dissonance that, you know, just you have to still get it just so, like you would your perfect fifths or your major thirds. And it's really beautiful when it locks in.
Yeah.
That is funny. All right. Well, so would you talk some about projects you have coming down the pike, performances in 2023? And like I say, we're certainly really excited about April 22nd at Whitewater, having the Delphia Quartet as our guest artist for our cello day. But before and after that, in addition to that, what's going on in 2023?
Sorry. In 2023, we're doing this program through Minnesota Public Radio called Class Notes. And it's where we go into schools and we do a 45-minute educational performance. And so we're very excited about that. It's sometimes elementary schools, but it's also high schools. We're very excited to come to Wisconsin in April. It's our first time coming to Wisconsin. So we're going to play in La Crosse and hopefully Madison and maybe Eau Claire. So it's going to be fun to do a program there. That's mostly what's going on for now. My husband and I bought a hobby farm. So what's coming up for the springtime is largely raising of animals and a garden. So not music related, but that's something that we're really looking forward
to. And of course, you'll have your hands full with the little one.
Yeah, he has had a lot to say today. The background commentary.
Yeah. Future singer-songwriter.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that's excellent. Okay. Well, thanks so much, Julia. And again, we just can't wait to have you all visit. April's probably going to be here before we know it. Mm-hmm. And thanks for just sharing your story and your thoughts. These sorts of things, this inspiration that we can get thinking about music and why we love it as much as we do and what we want to do with it can be just what we need for a really successful weekend of practicing. So thanks again, and everybody out there, see you this time next Friday.